what does David would say? TikTok, time to rock.
TikTok time to rock is how he starts. He's trademarked it, I'm pretty sure, though. You have to give him credit anytime you say it.
Yes. TM, David Wood TM.
See,
Hey folks, Rob for Sentinel, and I'm here with my good friend Mike for IP. All of you know him. Sort of like I'm going to be going and doing a lot of private stuff in my personal life. Like I'm going to be moving around, and so I won't be doing much streams. But Mike got me just in time for a review response to Kip's stream just, what, 12 hours ago?
yeah, you said you were about to like leave, so I was like, screw it, let's just do it now. Like, let's just get it out of the way. I was gonna wait maybe next week, but now let's do it now.
Yeah, let's just do it now. Yeah. So I gave it a viewing. Came up to like a 2 hour 44 minute mark. He's talking like he just came up to like the Deuteronomy 32-bit, which is going to be quite interesting when we if we're able to get there.
I'm just convinced now Kip doesn't like listen to understand, he listens to respond, because there's a lot of times he's like going into things and I'm like, yeah, I literally said that. Like, what are you talking about? No, so what happened was is Joel Correcco and I did like a stream on my channel where we talked about how like the Old Testament really doesn't make a distinction between two gods, El and Yahweh. Like, it never really says Yahweh was a son of El. Yahweh and El are just two names for the same God. And he got upset by that, so he decided to respond and really just made a lot of errors. I don't know if I would call them errors per se. Some are, like, especially with Mark Smith. Like, should have read all of chapter 2 there, buddy. But like, just like misunderstanding what we were saying and going over. And this is like a reoccurring problem with him. Like, I've heard other people say this as well. Like, he just doesn't know how to steel man people. And like, there's a lot of times I'm like, dude, why are you telling me this? That's what you're responding to me saying something. And the way you're responding is just saying what I already said. Like when I gave my example with Acts 17, like, dude, like, are you even trying?
Also, based on memory, because we're going to go through the stream, but just based on memory, my initial reactions is that, for example, Chrissy, she,
yeah, he's in
so she,
I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, but
I think it's she.
apparently, like when he brought up Psalm 89, and like the B'nai Elim there, and it's like the sons of the gods, and then the encleptic mem sort of categorization. It's like, it could also mean singular god, which is interesting because Heiser, like I've sort of brought up a few things sort of like off the cuff with Heiser's work, which Kip for some reason doesn't seem really familiar with. He's only familiar with, from what I can tell in the stream, just Unseen Realm. But Heiser's Unseen Realm is like a walk in the park, sort of like introductory level to the grand thing, which gets into like his angels books, demons books, all the scholarly papers that he's published since, that he then cites back, even papers back in like 2006 that are still relevant. And that's one of his papers is titled "Are Yahweh and El Distinct Deities?" which is a 2006 paper, which is why I titled the stream that, because the paper is still relevant in response.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, just pretending Unseen Realm is like his only work on this is weird. Like, I've read his dissertation in many of his papers. Like, he goes into this in far more detail. And Kip China just pretended like, well, this is all he says in the Unseen Realm. Yeah, but look what he says elsewhere. Like, he goes into a lot more detail. But yeah, there's a lot of problems in Kip's stream, and I gave you some time markers we can respond to.
Yeah. Let's do that. The first time marker you gave, let me just get there.
$26.30.
$26.30. All right, let's do that.
Yeah, instead of just playing the whole 3 hours, we try to hit the main points. And you leave out super chats, that kind of stuff.
All right, 1.5 speed.
That's fine. Yeah, because I think he was playing ours on high speed.
Yeah, I was listening to it on that, and it seemed pretty nice. All right, here we go.
So I want to point out a couple of important things here right away. I hope everybody sees a number of these very critical key terms. We have the name Yahweh repeated throughout this psalm, which is delivered to Yahweh, extolling his greatness, but importantly, extolling his greatness in this council of Kedoshim, the council of the holy ones. When it says that who is like Yahweh among the sons of the gods, it's assuming that Yahweh is a part of this group. The preposition there is the preposition bet, which requires some inclusion most of the time. That's what it means in this particular instance. You'll notice that there's a distinction made here between Yahweh and between El, and we know of El, the high god of Canaanite pantheons from numerous texts discovered at Ugarit. El makes frequent appearances throughout the biblical text as well. But I think I want you to look at this, friends, and I want you to see clearly that it's subtle, but there is a distinction here. El is not Yahweh in this poem, in this psalm. El is the one who's greatly dreaded in the close council of the Kedoshim, feared by all who surround him. In this next line here, something else I want to point out that's not going to come out in the English, but is particular to the Hebrew, and we're going to be coming back to this point a few more times as we go forward in today's stream. Yahweh is the God of armies, Elohei Tsabaot. This is employing, this is a construct using the plural noun Elohim along with the plural noun Sabaot, which generally means armies. Yahweh Tsabaot is most commonly translated as the Lord of Hosts in a lot of English translations of the Old Testament. Here, I think it's significant that Yahweh is identified as an Elohim. And I think in this particular poem, this helps to make that separation between who he is and who El is in this council. This is part of what provides for his inclusion among the B'nai Elim, the sons of the gods. So this is our starting place. Enclitic, yes. Thank you.
Oh yeah, this is the bit where
that's useful. Thanks, Chrissy. Sorry, that threw me off.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chrissy's right. This is not.
You can pause it
there.
there.
Enclitic.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not properly plural, so there's a problem right there. But I mean, like, this was a very weird argument from Nate. So he's trying to say that in Psalm 89, that there's a distinction between El and Yahweh in this. Like, so apparently verse 7, if you read in English, it just says, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones. I'm trying to wrap my head around this going like, so like if you just read the poem or the psalm, it says it's about Yahweh. And all of a sudden it's about El. And then in the very next verse, it's about Yahweh again. All of these just seem to be referring to Yahweh. So verse 6 says, for who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings is like Yahweh? El greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. Lord God of or Yahweh, God of hosts, who is mighty, who is mighty as you are, O Yahweh. This whole psalm seems to be talking about this one God, Yahweh, who is above all the other B'nai Elohim, or Elohim in general, perhaps. It's just like, but so El is above all, but also Yahweh is above all. Like it seems like verse 6, verse 7, and verse 8 are all sort of saying the same thing. It's just using a different term in the middle. And also, if you go down to verse 26, verse 26 says, he shall cry, you are my father, my El, the rock of my salvation. Okay, that seems to be in reference to Yahweh, and it's using the Hebrew term El. So wait, he's referring to, he says Yahweh is El later on, but earlier on he's differentiating. This is really strange, and there's no justification in this poem to even say El and Yahweh are seen as distinct. El just seems to be another title for Yahweh in this poem. It seems to be working against Kip's assumption. And I even checked Robert Alter on this. Robert Alter agrees there's this evolutionary thing going on in Israel where they're slowly sort of evolving. But he even agrees that verse 7 and verse 8 are basically just saying El is another name for Yahweh. This was a very odd argument for Kip to even use. I didn't even understand how this was supposed to help him. If anything, it works against him because there's no distinction made. It's just constantly talking about Yahweh. And we're just supposed to believe one verse in the middle is not about him? Like, that's really ad hoc.
Yeah, so John Hilber, for example, in the Zondervan Bible Backgrounds, I was thoroughly confused with this myself.
I know.
Because at the start of the psalm, you have this, I have made a covenant. All right. So let's try and fit Kip's interpretation here. So Deuteronomy 32, the inheritance for Jacob, right? In fact, you have this inheritance language, for example, mentioned in, say, Jeremiah 10. This is just an off-the-cuff sort of like random, yeah. So the portion of Jacob, like Jeremiah 10:16. So because this is in the context of idol worship, so the portion of Jacob is not like these. He made everything, and Israel is a tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of there's the Sabaoth, right? So coming back to Psalm 89, Hilbert is connecting the 2 Samuel 7 sort of like terminology to this. And then when he gets straight into from verse 5 down, so you have divine council imagery, which scholars like Heiser make a big deal on this, that when you have people, mostly in the New Testament field, interpret Psalm 82 as speaking about judges, human judges, Heiser immediately will use Psalm 89 as sort of like 89 is very specific. It's these sons of God in the heavenlies, in the skies, right? Who in the skies can be comparable to you? So obviously there's no human judges up there, right?
Yeah, and actually Joel Carreco agrees with you. He says Psalm 89:6 does not, the Hebrew grammar does not include Yahweh among the sons of God.
Yeah. But then if Kip is going to differentiate between El and Yahweh in Psalm 89, hang on a second. According to, if you want to go down the Wellhausen hypothesis, like the breakup of Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2, when the Yahweh term appears in Genesis 2, which, by the way, Genesis 2:1 says this, just to clarify another point. Genesis 2:1 literally says, "With this the heavens and the earth were completed, including all of its vast array." Literally, the armies. So, but we know that chapter 2 starts including this Yahweh figure, right? So, notice that verses 9 to 10 is about God defeating the surging sea. Wait, is Psalm 89 now going back to the creation story? So who did the creation? Was it El? Was it Yahweh? Well, El's not there in Genesis 1. Is El mentioned in Genesis 2? No.
Well, I mean,
when do we?
I mean, like 9 already says, "You rule the raging seas." It sort of like suggests he's already above. And again, like, just to be clear, verse 6 is not saying like I'm not saying Kip is wrong. It could mean he's among, but it doesn't. He sort of treats it as if it necessitates that. It doesn't necessitate it. It could just mean, it doesn't mean he has to be among them. It's the grammar does not necessitate that. Is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So just the surrounding context of the psalm doesn't make sense in light of its evaluation of. We're talking about Exodus imagery. We're talking about creation imagery, and now just generally like divine council imagery. And so then the other thing I wanted to point out, sort of like off the cuff here, is in Heiser's book on angels, he has a specific, let's see here, I'll have to, let's see.
Which book is this one?
This is in his angels book.
Oh, okay.
He has, here we go. He has like this very explicit, and I'll have to zoom in so you guys can actually see what's going on. So he did a very good job, a lot of extensive work in doing a comparison between the Hebrew Bible, Second Temple text, of Qumran stuff, and then the Septuagint's re-rendering of it. And when he goes into the heavenly host situation, he wants to point out that, look, when we start going down the Qumran sectarian manuscript context, when this notion of an evolution from a polytheistic sort of framework to a monotheistic framework is sort of like the cart before the horse.
Right.
Why do the Qumran Jews maintain a divine council sort of imagery having Yahweh as the head with respect to Psalm 89. So there's one particular, I had a specific phrase saved up over here. I'll have to get it. Oh, here it is. So for example, I'm just throwing this like a random one out there. So this is in Dwayne Garrett's very recent 2024 book on Job. There's a particular phrase that occurs in Psalm 29, which, by the way, 29 echoes like a polemically, Baal, storm god imagery. There's your Psalm 89, and then the Aramaic version that you see in Daniel 3. There's your Psalm 82. Now, let's see, coming back. Here. Well, how about, because I'm sort of like trying to find this on a whim here. We'll keep playing Kip's stream.
Yeah, why don't we
so
go
I
to the
can
next
find
time
a
marker
specific
where you
shot.
find it.
Yeah, I'll do
Yeah,
that.
I mean, so
Yeah.
basically Psalm 89, I think that just works against them because there's no distinction made. It just seems to be like Yahweh, Yahweh, El, Yahweh. There's never an indicator that El is supposed to be a different deity. So using this just seems to work against Kip. But I mean,
Yeah.
like, let's get to Psalm 82 because that's another big one they use where they try to like argue, yeah, this one definitely shows a distinction between El and Yahweh. And Heiser's talked a lot about this. He's written several papers on Psalm 82.
Yep. So the next time stamp is
3650, I think I have down, or 3630. Sorry.
all right. Let's do that.
Judge the earth, for you will inherit all the nations. Now, some things to point out here, which are really important, is this God, this Elohim, is standing in the council of El. Who is this? He's not named, but he's clearly not El, and he's also not one of these other gods of the nations whom he is condemning and indicting with his speech. This is universally, as far as I'm aware, almost universally understood to be Yahweh, in an anonymized version of Yahweh. He's not named, but he's clearly the one who's taking a stand in the council and indicting the remaining gods, the sons of Elyon, the members of the council of El. And yeah, this is an excellent point, Chrissy. Yah is literally Hasatan in this passage. He's literally the adversary. He's taking on the role of the crown prosecutor, speaking on behalf of the king in seeking justice. Excellent point. I love it. So good. But it's very difficult to actually read something like Psalm 82 and not see that this polytheistic picture, this picture of multiple divine beings, of Yahweh being presented anonymously as a member of the court of El, of the council of El, but this is not his council. I would say El takes a very passive role, and this is what we tend to see.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's so much written on this. I mean, for one thing, it just seems to be missing the main point of the psalm. Yeah, Yahweh is the accuser. That's the point. None of the sons of God that are mentioned in there can actually function in any of these roles. So Yahweh's got to take all the roles. He's the judge and the accuser. Notice at the end, it's Yahweh who is passing judgment on them. And like, this is like Heiser like quoted like Kirsten Nielsen on this and the Divine Council and late canonical and non-canonical Second Temple Jewish literature. He says it would appear from our brief survey of recent research, as well as the textual analysis we have here performed, that it is characteristic of prophetic lawsuit that Yahweh enjoys the dual role of prosecutor and judge. That Yahweh appears as prosecutor can be explained by the fact that he is the one who has been wronged. And like Heiser also compares this to Zechariah 3, where Yahweh again forms a dual role there. He is he's acting in two roles against the Satan in that point. So he's not the accuser; he's in the other role in that stuff. But I mean, like, you see this in the Hebrew Bible, the Yahweh's taking on multiple roles, and that would fit with the theme of the psalm. The sons of God can't be called upon to be appropriate accusers or to act on Yahweh's behalf, so he's got to do it. And then at the end, of course, as Heiser has noted, you see Yahweh acting as judge. He's also passing judgment. So yeah, he is the accuser in the psalm. We don't deny that. Heiser doesn't deny that, but he's also the judge at the end. So like I don't understand how this is supposed to be an issue. This doesn't show that Yahweh is subordinate to El. I mean, as Heiser says in that paper I mentioned, the burden of proof falls to Smith, Parker, and other scholars to detect any expression in the Hebrew Bible that demonstrates Yahweh lacked jurisdiction over any part of the earth at any time in Israelite religion. So like we need to actually see, like, because the psalm doesn't say Yahweh is subordinate to El. They're assuming that, they're reading that into there. Instead, it just makes more sense with the actual context that he's taking a dual role aspect to just show how incompetent the sons of gods are, why they need to be judged. He can't call upon any one of them to be the accuser. He's got to fill that role. So like, it's like missing the forest for the trees. Like, look at the whole psalm and see what it's actually trying to do here. This is part of the cleverness of the author.
Now, this whole notion of univocality, right?
Oh yeah, that'll come up later because it's going to shoot them, and you'll use it against them when we get to Deuteronomy 30.
So I found the chart. I'll mention the chart in a moment. So here's the chart over here. It's just after this bit over here where Heiser will now go through. Here's a whole list on the left. There's all the particular terms. What does the Septuagint do with it? And obviously down over here, you can see here Psalm 89:7. So he's going by the Hebrew text numbering. The B'nai Elim here. Notice that the Septuagint among the sons of God. And then I'll read this particular paragraph when necessary. But just before I do all that, with the Deuteronomy 32, well, with Psalm 82 specifically. So, Heiser's good friend, David Burnett, who happens to be good friends with, say, Dan McClellan, wrote a work, published a particular paper in 2019, which Heiser's going to cite now at the end of this paragraph. So Heiser will showcase the univocal context of Deuteronomy 32, how it was understood by Second Temple and then first century authors, for example, Paul. Paul clearly understands the allotment language where the true God who made heaven and earth, so Acts 17, has distributed human beings, blah, 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 blah. So notice you already have an engagement with the text, right? Interestingly, Plato, of all people, starts talking about Deuteronomy 32 language. I won't read the whole quote. If you want to pause the video,
language, sort of right? Like language, right?
Well, in the sense that, notice, in the days of old, the gods had the whole herd distributed among them by allotment. It's like, wait a second, where did you get that, Plato? And then he goes through this whole, and then, because don't forget, Paul is having to polemically engage the philosophers of his day. So then, if you skip down, Heiser wants to make the point that when Jesus comes on the scene, he destroys every rule, every authority, every power. This is the allotment language with the hierarchy of the gods, if you want to go in that direction. Therefore, who is Christ with respect to Psalm 82? Like, is Jesus, like the pre-incarnate Jesus, is he in Psalm 82? Could you do that implicitly? Well, later on in the stream, what really jumped out at me was that Kip, when he's distinguishing Yahweh and El, so he says that the Elohim of Psalm 82:1 stands in El's court, thereby trying to disconnect the two. The irony here is Heiser will say that's the two powers. So in other words, the second power is the one standing in El, in this case, and to use Christian theology, the Father's court, judging among the gods. And then, so now this is leading to a particular point. How does the psalm end with respect to resurrection language? It's like, wait, what? Psalm 82 and the resurrection? So, like, for example, in Romans 15, Paul says, he who arises to rule the Gentiles. And scholarship has gone into the lemma for rising, right, which is connected to, like, resurrection theology. That particular term is used for the resurrection. So then how on earth is that connected to Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32? Well, notice you have, for example, Zephaniah 3:8. For the day of my rising up, right, will be the gathering of the nations. So the resurrection will lead to what we see in Pentecost. And how do we see Psalm 82 end? Well, here's Hayes in his words. Lastly, Psalm 82 itself is part of the matrix of ideas that contribute to Paul's theology of the abrogation of the authority of the allotted powers. Recall that after castigating the gods and sentencing them to die like humans, the psalmist closed the divine council scene with a plea: Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Now hang on a second. If the Most High of Deuteronomy 32:8 is not Yahweh of 32:9, and then you have specifically Israel allotted, like Yahweh took, Deuteronomy 4, by the way, has the Most High, Yahweh, taking the, Israel for himself, which obviously means he is the Most High. But then Kip may go down the whole like, no, chapter 4 is later than chapter 32. We won't go there right now, but
we will.
We will, but not right now. I just want to make this point that if verse 9 has Yahweh as a son of El, now you have to believe, if you're going to be consistent, and hence the whole, the sort of like the hypocritical univocalness sort of creeps in even in his model. You have to be, in other words, you have to be univocal with Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32. So 32:8 will then have the son of El taking over El's position. He's going to inherit everything. So, and that's not just that. You see, for you shall inherit all the nations, judge the earth. Interestingly, the Septuagint translator has that particular Greek term that will then be used later on for Christians with respect to the resurrection. And then when you go and see, early Christian churches and like the ante-Nicene fathers, post-Nicene, specifically in the Byzantine context, I kid you not, they re-rendered this particular psalm as resurrect, O God. And notice that in this footnote over here, so if I click on footnote 35, oh wait, it's sort of, I don't know if that's come up properly. Oh, yeah. It's, well, the top of the name of the author, let's see if I do it this way, the author should come up. There you go, David A. Burnett, A Neglected Deuteronomic Scriptural Matrix for the Nature of the Resurrection Body in 1 Corinthians 15. And what he does is he connects the resurrection language in 1 Corinthians 15 to Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32. And David Burnett is a critical scholar. But anyway, I just wanted to suddenly just throw that in there as a little cool little snippet about Psalm 82. So
yeah, I mean, like, yeah. I'm not sure I would agree with that, but I mean, even if like, the way I would say that is like, even if Kip is right, like, this is not a problem for Christian theology. Ultimately, like, this would fit in with like a Trinitarian outlook. So like, even if Kip is right, like, it's not a problem for Christians. But I think there's just a lot of other problems, like, which we'll get into, like Numbers 23, for example.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So like in the original stream, I pointed out that like one of the early Israelite texts, Numbers 23, is an oracle of Balaam. Verse 8 says, how can I curse who El is cursed? How can I denounce who Yahweh is not denounced? And I'm like, look, it's equating. Well, Kip doesn't agree. And he thinks like they're not being equated. So we're going to have to bring up Mark Smith again. But it's kind of a weird argument. I think this is pretty, I've not found a lot of recent commentators that make that argument. But and I'll show why. It's pretty clear when you look at the actual oracle.
So in conclusion, with respect to the table, massive list comparing the two, the Hebrew with respect to the Greek, and then the Second Temple text. And Heiser says, the chart illustrates that there are 8 passages when Septuagint translator has taken the language of divine plurality rendered as angels, but the chart indicates that there are more places where the Septuagint translator decided otherwise, preferring a more literal equivalent. Some of those instances, and guess what? Psalm 29, Psalm 82, Psalm 89, and Exodus 15, are among the most frequently cited passages by scholars seeking to argue that the Hebrew Bible preserves Kip's word, vestiges of polytheism. If Jews of the Second Temple period were concerned that such language might be taken as polytheism, it would make little sense to leave passages like these intact, undisguised as angels. The unevenness of what we find shows that the Septuagint cannot be regarded as proof for a campaign to erase polytheistic language and downgrade instance of divine plurality to angels. The argument that the Septuagint sought to eliminate polytheistic language gets even weaker when one investigates the text critical data for the 8 passages that render plural Elim, Elohim, B'nai, all that, with Angeloi. So of the 8 instances noted above where the translator decided to use Angeloi, there are variant Septuagint manuscript readings preserving the more literalistic rendering in half of them. This again indicates the lack of a theological concern with the Hebrew terminology within the literate Jewish community. It may be the case that a few Septuagint translators preferred angels to gods or sons of God, but the data show that many had no such concern. So,
I know.
I don't know what else to do. Like
I mean, yeah,
he's going to accuse you of using outdated scholarship, but the irony here is just because time flies by. I mean, that you see, that in itself, I'm sort of frustrated because I'm coming here from the field of the sciences. There's still stuff in the past, we're talking like 300-400 years, and it's like in mathematical treatises that are still.
Well, the funny thing
we're working on it even today. Like just because some. Yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, he accuses me of using Otto Eichfeld, who's outdated, but then he right after this says, "Well, Otto Eichfeld is right." Well, then what's the problem? Like, it doesn't matter when it was said. If he's right, that's why I use it, because you're just bringing it up to score points, not because you're actually trying to educate. Like, who cares if it was in the 50s? If it was wrong in the 50s, don't use it. But like, it's a good quote. It articulates the point across well. That's why I use it. And if he just admits I'm right, okay, who cares? What's the problem?
Yeah. So I don't see why just because he's 50 something years prior, like as if that's lost any value in any way.
Well, like I cited him and Mark Smith together. It's like an older and a newer one, and I can cite
I understand
as well.
Yeah, and I understand. Even in my own Q&As, I'm always encouraging like my own audience, stick with the latest commentaries, or stick with the latest this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And even you and I, when we are doing our own little devotions or whatever, that's just the way peer review works and the sort of scientific method works. We seem to become fixated with, well, what's the latest, But then usually you're taking a couple of steps back sometimes. Sometimes you have a downgrade just because it's the latest, and then you have retraction of papers. So, there's still nothing wrong with a lot of the past scholarship. A lot of the past scholarship is pretty fine scholarship.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I can bring that quote up later. But I mean, if you want to move on to we can get to I want to do Numbers 23 a lot. I really want to get to that because I don't even know, man. Like,
when I heard that bit, I'm just like, oh my gosh. All right. What's the next timestamp?
Let's go to 104:55.
Okay, so we're skipping all this, that's the super chats.
There's a lot of super chats are in there, a lot of fluff. I mean,
okay, 104:55. You said so.
Yeah.
All right.
Deuteronomy chapter 32. Mark Smith argues that the writer was not trying to communicate a polytheistic picture of the world, but was drawing on one to make a point about Yahweh. But it's a little bit more involved than that. So I think it's important. We'll get to the site. We'll get to the quotation that Michael put up here.
By the way, I have the PDF of this book if you want me to bring it up. Specifically the page. Because when he was reading it was so blurry. Like I couldn't even...
Yeah, well, here's the thing is this is what I mean about Kip. He doesn't listen to understand. He listens to respond. He basically said, yeah, I'm right, how I use Mark Smith. The author of Deuteronomy 32 is not implying polytheism, but Kip's about to go on to quote Mark Smith saying, yeah, but there's still this, Mark Smith still believes in like this earlier evolutionary picture where Yahweh was originally a son and then he like evolved up. And it's like, okay, Kip, I don't know if you realize it, but you're allowed to quote authors and not agree with literally everything they said. Yeah. All I did was cite Mark Smith on what the author of Deuteronomy 32 was intending. That doesn't mean I have to agree with him everywhere. And I also even in the stream went on to be like, even address that. Like, that was the whole point of bringing up Act 17 and like talking about, listen, even if there was the author was drawing on this older polytheistic view, that's not a big deal. Like, look at what Paul does in Act 17. He takes pagan, the Stoic philosopher Aratus, or the poet, and he like takes what he wrote and he applies it to Yahweh. That doesn't mean that what's in Act 17 is Stoic pantheism. Like, say, if the author of Deuteronomy 32 is doing something similar, he's taking this older idea and reworking it in a poem which he viewed as Yahweh as the Most High, that's not a problem. So like, Kip doesn't understand what I'm actually saying here, and he kind of takes me out of context, because I'm only using Mark Smith to argue that the author of Deuteronomy 32 did not intend polytheism. And even if Mark Smith's larger picture is right, it doesn't matter in the long run, because what Christians are focused on is what the actual biblical authors are saying and what they're trying to get across. So like, Kip is going to go on this big long spiel about, this is what Mark Smith believes. Why didn't IP mention this?
Yep.
You didn't pay attention to what I said, Kip, because you're interested in scoring points. You're not listening to understand.
All right. Do you remember the page he's reading from Smith's God in Translation?
For numbers?
Well,
it's like around 95 or something. But if you want to go ahead to like,
we'll play the clip. Yeah, and then
here in a bit. But we're going to start just talking a little bit about this book that Smith wrote. Smith's book is about the cross-cultural recognition of deities.
So he's
drawing on the earlier work of
because he's just explaining the book a little bit here. It's irrelevant to my point, because like, this is what I mean. Like, Kip goes on this big long sidetrack that has nothing to do. He's not even responding to me at this point, because all I was doing is saying, hey, look, even one of your guys agrees that this poem in Deuteronomy 32 doesn't support the overall polytheistic background. So you want to just like skip this, go to 1:16:18.
All right.
We'll get to like Kip's main point, actually, because he just basically explaining that Mark Smith agrees with this idea that Yahweh was originally a son and then evolved into the high God and was merged with El. Yeah, we know. Like, that's not the point. Like, I can quote authors I don't entirely agree with on. This should be pretty obvious.
Okay.
But listen, I hope everyone can see what I'm getting at here. Vishanti, based on that, does it sound like Mark Smith is holding up this idea of Michael's that there was never any distinction between El and Yahweh in the Bible or in early Israel, and from the very earliest time, Yahweh was always the supreme and the only God that was worshipped exclusively by the Israelites? Were you catching that message?
Well, before Vishanti answers, I just want to say, and this is, I mean this in all love, being a Kiwi and I'm an Aussie, it's interesting. It's like, just as Kip has the same distance between Vishanti and himself, it's like Mike and I also have the same distance between Australia and...
Oh, I think she's actually in LA, from what I can gather.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, in the chat, she's like, "I'm Kiwi, better be careful, Rob." So I'm like, all right.
From Mark Smith.
The excerpt that we just read said the opposite of that.
It said the opposite, guys. Mark Smith,
is, as we say on Dapper Dinosaur's channel, a Trojan source. When you quote a text and then it actively contradicts what you just said about it.
Well, see, this is what happens when you actually read it.
All right. Is there a specific thing on Smith's page you want to touch on?
Well, I mean, you just bring it up. I mean, like, yeah, Smith is basically arguing for this idea that Yahweh slowly evolved into the high creator deity thing. That's irrelevant to the main point I was making. You go back to my stream, the only reason I'm quoting him is to show that he didn't think the author of Deuteronomy 32 was suggesting that. The author of Deuteronomy 32 is just basically saying, I'm inheriting this older idea, but I'm reinterpreting it as if Yahweh's the Most High. So, like, I don't know what Kip goes on for, like, so long for. Like, it's such a straw man. Like, you can quote authors you don't fully agree with and just simply point out, hey, look, but at least he agrees here. Because, you know, if I were to just quote Michael Heiser, Alan Miller, they would say something like, well, see, he's only quoting those conservative scholars. But then if I bring up like someone like Smith, for example, like, okay, well, I'm not just quoting conservative scholars, but then they'll say this, like, oh, well, he doesn't agree entirely with what IP says. duh, Kip, like use some common sense here. But I mean, like, there's so many other authors we can cite. Like, again, I'll cite Michael Hunley here, who again is not, I don't agree entirely with him, but he also agrees Deuteronomy 32 is not saying that. So he says, some in his book, Yahweh Among the Gods, some scholars even suggest that El was the original God of Israel. For example, the nation is called Israel, not Israel or Israel Yahweh. In places, El may be identified as the patriarchal God and the God of the Exodus. Such an association is reasonable given El's prominence as the high god at Ugarit, likely regionally, and nearby Amman. Whether or not we posit an original distinction between El and Yahweh, the text clearly identifies El with Yahweh. Then he goes on to say, Deuteronomy 32, 8-9 speaks similarly of Elion in the role of a high god, who apportions the nations according to the sons of God, with Yahweh's portion being Israel. While the author or redactor of Deuteronomy likely equates Yahweh with Elion, one could argue that Elion originally may have been the high god, while Yahweh was one of the second-tier sons of God to whom the various people were allotted. Well, Elion originally may have referred to a god other than Yahweh in some traditions. The Hebrew text, nonetheless, makes sure to connect them. The non-P Pentateuch does little to distinguish between El and Yahweh and offers no polemic against El. Instead, it merges El into Yahweh, such that Yahweh absorbs all of El's titles and characters. The peaceful takeover is so thorough that the interpreter cannot be sure that they ever applied to anyone other than Yahweh. So, I mean, like, you can even cite very recent scholarship here saying basically what Mark Smith was saying. Like, I'm not denying there could have been an earlier polytheistic picture. I even said that in the stream. Kip just conveniently ignored that because he's here to score points and take the least charitable interpretation he possibly can. My point is, like, what are the authors doing here with Deuteronomy 32? He's not trying to say that El is some sort of like different God. And in fact, it's very clear when you get further down and read later in the psalm, or I'm sorry, not the psalm, but in the poem, because he says, even I am he, there is none beside me, speaking as Yahweh. If in the very chapter, Deuteronomy 32, Yahweh is saying there's none beside me, that suggests that the author already thought of Yahweh as unique and above all other Elohim.
Also, my eye just caught this in regards to footnote 20, because Kip is going to read from page 96. I just saw on the stream there. Smith here, when he says early Israel's sense of itself as a cultural entity is not expressed in terms of translatability or its lack, at least not in text considered to be old. Keyword here, old. Then he goes from 20 onwards, Judges 5:8 has been accepted sometimes without comment. And ironically, I'm just throwing this out there, Smith has literally just released a hermeneutic commentary on Judges, so I can't wait to check that out. But he says here, has been accepted sometimes without comment as old evidence for Israel's sense of quote-unquote new gods as not their own. When I skip down, he says this. He says, one may ask in addition whether Elohim in Judges 5:8 might reflect a rhetorical use for leaders. In any case, human figures appear to be involved in accordance with the context. It may be that the later interpretation of 5:8 was informed by a verse that addresses the problem of other gods, namely, and this bit, but it's verse 17 of Deuteronomy 32. But then he says, which is hardly pre-monarchic. Now, I want to quickly this is just a side point. When I was sort of mashing all this together, I came across a review by Heiser of a particular work, Brian Schmidt's work. Here it is. Let me zoom in. Brian Schmidt, The Materiality, Power, Explorations in the Social History of Early Israelite Magic. Heiser reviewed this work, and then this bit down here. So obviously, in this work you have Yahweh and his Asherah, like, warding off evil and blah, blah, blah. Heiser says this. He says, after his discussion of inscriptional case studies, Smith turns to, 32, text that he and many others consider evidence that early biblical Israelite religion had a pantheon and was henotheistic. This move fits his goal of viewing Yahweh and his Asher as equal partners in thwarting evil, and so on and so on. But he's like, look, this reviewer has addressed the exegetical and logical fallacies driving this thinking about the distinction between the Elyon, the Most High figure, and the Yahweh figure, verse 9, considered to be distinct deities. And then he says, which I didn't see Kip address this in the whole stream. One such fallacious example is this, that he assumes that the father, so here's the specific Hebrew term here, you have father to son, right? Equation, is justified by Ugaritic El being described as Most High and having many sons underneath his sovereignty. Yet Schmidt fails to cite any Ugaritic text for El as Most High for a good reason. There isn't a single one. At Ugarit, only Baal bears this epithet. And then he says, so now with respect to verse 17, on a more positive note, Smith's treatment of 32:17 is excellent and in some respects groundbreaking. Rather than embracing the unsound notion that the Shadim, rendered demons in the ESV, are not deities because they have no cult in Mesopotamia and so on, he's basically saying, look, you can equate these to be another category of Elohim, right? Like some sort of divine being, deity sort of being. But then at the same time, that doesn't then connect to a polytheistic evolution. See, like this does not mean the Israelite religion evolved from polytheism into monotheism. And so I just wanted to quickly throw that in there just randomly because I didn't see that before. But that's an interesting point that he makes there. But Kip is reading from this page, and as what I can tell, he didn't really highlight in his original stream.
I don't know.
That's all it is.
I mean, he just goes on to explain Smith's view as if that's somehow a problem for me, and it's just a total straw man. Like,
right?
I know what Smith's view is. Like that. Like that's the point. I'm citing someone who doesn't entirely agree with me to make a point about Deuteronomy 32. It's like, and instead of Kip recognizing that, he's trying to score cheap shots. Like,
right? Okay. All right. What would be the next timestamp?
Go to 119:07. Let's move up a little bit because I think we're going to finally start getting to. And the number's 23.
Oh yeah, numbers 23. Here it is.
Because this is one of the, like, if you go, like, you look right in there, it says, how can I enchant who El has not enchanted? How can I curse who Yahweh is not cursed? I just want to hear Kip read this, and then we'll jump ahead to his main point.
Yep. Okay, let's do that.
From Aram, Balak has led me, the king of Moab from the mountains of the east. Go, bind Jacob for me in a curse. Go, curse for me Israel. How can I enchant whom El has not enchanted? How can I curse whom Yahweh has not cursed? From the top of the mountains, I can see him. From the hills, I can gaze down at him. See the people settled alone. Among the nations, he is not considered. Who has counted the dust of Jacob? Number the dust cloud of Israel. That my life might die a death of righteous men, that I might take after them. So that's the first oracle in verses 7.
Okay, you can pause it there, and then just go to 136:58 because he's just gonna keep reading numbers. He's going to keep reading numbers 23 and 24 and just comment on it. And I just want to get to his main point here. So you can go ahead there.
I guess we have to plow forward because I have many things to say. But the point here I want to make is that far from Numbers chapter 23 preserving this sense of Yahweh's distinction as a high creator God alone, for the Israelites, this is not happening, people. El and Yahweh and Elyon and the Shaddai gods, they're all in there in the Balaam oracles. Importantly, Yahweh, I think what I see in the Balaam oracles, Yahweh is distinct as the God of Israel, yes, but Balaam talks to El, and he sees what the Shaddai gods show him. He talks to Elyon, right? So yeah, there's limited.
Yeah, and honestly, so when I listen to the stream, and there's and Kip is going to get into the whole like no preparation, sort of like mudding the water nonsense. Mm-hmm. But it's like, dude, I went through every commentary on verse 8, 23:8, like earlier today, and then I had to do other things. Not one ranging from like Anchor Yale to Hermania to take your pick. It's like,
well, let's just here. Can you? Oh, go ahead. Continue.
No. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can share my screen for a minute, I just want to
Yep.
show the point, like how we can actually just show this. So this is Numbers 23, and I just want you to So Kip read this, and it just didn't dawn on him. So from Aram, Balak has brought me the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Notice it's the same thing. Come, curse Jacob for me. Come, denounce Israel. Same thing again. How can I curse who God has not cursed? How can I denounce who the Lord has not denounced? Okay, move on. From the top of the crags, I see him. From the hills, I behold him. Again, same thing. Behold a people dwelling alone, not counting itself among the nations. Again, same thing. Let me just go to my next slide. So this is what's happening in the oracle. Same. And somehow in the middle, we're just supposed to believe that this is not the same. Like if you follow the pattern happening in this, he's just repeating in the next line. This is Hebrew parallelism. So this is why El and Yahweh are equated as the same here. And this is what Robert Alter says. A non-Israelite visionary such as Balaam might well speak of El in the old Canaanite sense, yet El appears to be a synonym in the parallelism of the two verse sets of this line with Yahweh the Lord. And in the second oracle, El plays precisely the traditional role of Yahweh in bringing Israel out of Egypt. Now, the funny thing is Kip just went on a big long tangent earlier in this stream, quoting Mark Smith, saying, I didn't read Mark Smith. Well, if he would have just finished reading the rest of chapter 2, like Smith points out, says, interestingly enough, the God particularly prominent in both the biblical and non-biblical texts, quoting his words as El, the very source of his divine inspiration. In the biblical account of Balaam, this El is readily identified as Yahweh's. And then look what he puts in parentheses. Numbers 23:8. So, Kip accused me quite often of not fully reading Mark Smith. I think I can return the favor. Did he not fully read the rest of chapter 2 when he was doing this stream? Because he tries to claim that Mark Smith didn't agree with me. But here, Smith is making the same point I'm making, that in the oracles, he's equating them. And this is part of what Mark Smith is talking about, the translatability, that Balaam may have not thought this, but when it comes into Israel, when it comes into in Numbers, the author is clearly equating them. So for him to even use Numbers 23, he's like shooting yourself in the foot. It's equating El and Yahweh, and this is a very early text. I have no idea how Kip could look at this and think, oh yeah, this is clearly distinguishing between El and Yahweh, when his own source, Mark Smith, doesn't say that. Robert Alt doesn't say that. You said none of the commentaries. And again, if you just look at it, it's clearly parallelism. Balak, king of Moab, Jacob, Israel, El, Yahweh, the tops and then the hills, dwelling people, can't count, dust of Jacob, fourth part of Israel. I mean, it's let me die, let me come to my end. It's the same. But we're supposed to believe in the middle of this, El and Yahweh are not already being equated. It's absurd.
Yeah, so, and just so that people can see it for themselves, what I'm going to do is do this. This is the page that Mike has cited in a PowerPoint slide. Notice here, page 129. In closing this chapter, he's going to go down the summarization. And then notice here, he says, a prophet who crosses cultural and religious boundaries, Balaam, is quintessential figure of translatability. Interestingly enough, the God particularly prominent in both the biblical and non-biblical texts quoting his words is El, the very source of his divine inspiration. And in the biblical account, this El is readily identified as Yahweh. So when Kip was differentiating the two, I'm thinking, wait, what?
I know.
And not right now because I need time to quickly search for it, but I want to show what Heiser says with respect to, again, this El Yahweh sort of like fusion that happens. Even Richard Friedman, now that comes to mind, like in his Exodus work, he literally argues for El Yahweh fusion. There is no El as the Father, and unless you, I was just going to throw this like an off-the-cuff point, unless you want to go down a Trinitarian model, which ironically that would be a Trinitarian argument, but then you're arguing that Jesus is Yahweh, like terminologically speaking, as the son of El, right? Anyway,
well, I mean, even if that's the right interpretation at the end of the day, and we just have to concede, this is not a problem for Trinitarian theology. Like,
which
there's
when
a
he brings
way
up
it would
Michael
work.
Siegel, right, with Daniel
Yeah.
7, and yeah.
It's like I wouldn't like. They keep always accusing us of like this being like a theological motivated thing, and it's like, no, like this would easily work with our theology. In fact, like I would use it to like support like a multi-personal God in the Old Testament. I don't, because I'm just not convinced that's what the author of Deuteronomy 32 is doing. Like, I think Smith is right about that, but I can't quote him because, according to Kip, if you quote him, you have to agree with literally everything. The funny thing is that Kip is being a hypocrite here because he's quoting Smith to support his point, but Smith directly says, as you say, that Numbers 23 is equating El and Yahweh. So apparently it's okay for him to quote Smith and not agree with everything Smith does, but I can't do that. So it's wow, interesting double standard there.
Right. Okay. Any particular timestamp now, or
let's go to 147:30. I think we're gonna start getting into Deuteronomy 32, which is their best attempt to try to do this. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. Nachalato. All right. I just want to point out what should be patently obvious here. There are two divine beings in view in the space of these 6 or 8 lines here. I've actually got verses 7 to 9. Elyon is the one who's depicted giving the inheritance. The inheritance is being numbered as according to the sons of God. The other divine being here is Yahweh. And really the only way to read this text is that he is on the receiving end of whatever it is that is included in Bahan Kel, that is in the inheritance that Elyon is giving. Elyon is giving nations. Yahweh's inheritance, his share, his portion, his chalek, is Jacob, his people. I think this is abundantly clear that there is, if not an intended distinction, as Mark Smith attempts to argue by the writer of this poem, an unavoidable distinction. That is, this is such a deeply embedded, well-worn trope about Yahweh being within the council of deities of El, with Yahweh being included among the sons of El, that for all his best efforts, the writer of this poem, attempting to downplay and soften and mute and reduce that relationship, can't help it. It comes through. It's glaring. Is it glaring, Vish?
I mean,
by the way, no offense to you, Kip, but no, just the tone. It's like, is it glaring?
It's not. It may be for him, but he's saying this is the only way you can read it. And like, no, Mark Smith doesn't agree. Hunley doesn't agree. I mean, like, I'm going to start going through Theodore Lewis's book, but I'm told he doesn't agree. Like, that's the only way to read it. Like, that's absurd. That's absolutely 100% absurd, especially when you read it in context of the rest of the chapter. The author in verse 39 is already saying that Yahweh is the high God. He says has Yahweh speaking. He says there's no one beside me. That would not fit with the interpretation that he is getting an allotment from another God who is the Most High. The implication in verse 39 is Yahweh is the Most High. So this is why Smith can bring that up and say, no, this is probably the author's not intending to do that. So it's absurd. How could he say this is the only way to read that?
Yeah.
And you noted, like, Heiser talks about the Qumran community. They didn't read it like that. So like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Now, just so Kip can see some sort of like, I don't know, transparency here. Are you because I haven't really exhausted Smith's work, so this is sort of a question to you, Mike, if you can clarify something, because I came across a review by Heiser of Smith's 2001 work called The Origins of Biblical Monotheism, Israel's Polytheistic Background and Ugaritic Text. Now, as far as I can tell, has Smith been changing his views? Like,
no, I mean, Smith argues that Yahweh was originally a son of El. Then at some point he sort of gets like promoted up higher, and he gets equated with El at a later point. Smith, however, does admit he doesn't think the author of Deuteronomy 32 is trying to do that. He says the author of Deuteronomy 32 is inheriting that older picture, and then he's just sort of reinterpreted in his monotheistic framework. And like, I'm perfect. And I said even in the stream that Kip didn't want to like actually respond to, but I said in the stream, like, yeah, that's entirely possible. And I honestly would be okay with it, because the Bible says, like, you know, the Israelites worshiped other gods while they were in Egypt, or when your forefathers lived across the river, as the book of Joshua says. So like, if they sort of come in and Moses sort of comes in and is trying to fix their religious views, like, I'd be perfectly fine with them inheriting that. And then now they have this new revolutionary outlook, and they reinterpreted this dividing of the nations up and their new monotheistic, monolatristic framework. Like, that's not a problem. So like, bringing up like that idea, I just don't think it slowly evolved over several generations. I think it was more sudden. So like, bringing up Smith's like larger view doesn't challenge anything that I or Joel was saying in that stream. And this is what I mean. Kip doesn't listen to understand or to represent properly. He's listening to respond. He goes on these big, long tangents about what Smith believes. And I'm sitting here going, again, how is that a problem for my view? Did you even try to understand what I was arguing?
Right. So I was surprised to find this, by the way, literally yesterday. I didn't know Heiser actually reviewed this particular work. This is in the Near East Archaeological Society Bulletin, Volume 53, 2008. And he obviously, he shows a lot of respect. He's like, look, Smith's views have changed between the first and second editions. With these changes, Smith now holds that Yahweh and El are separate deities. His mature thought as presented here can be placed in the consensus of critical thought in his right religion development. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is this is still a 2001 work, and I'm just wondering in his more later works, like a 2016 work with the anthropomorphic emergence language for God, like if he's changed his views. Down in this review, I'll skip all this part. This is something I haven't seen anyone engage with, even in Kip's latest stream. These points that Heiser raises. So he says here, 32 and Psalm 82 do not have Yahweh and El as separate deities. So taking 32:8-9 this way requires ignoring the fact that Elyon is an epithet for Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible. Smith is well aware of this, but attributes it to quote-unquote later tradition. This would be most curious since Yahweh and El had been fused as early as the 8th century BC, by Smith's own admission on page 49. And a critical view of Deuteronomy's authorship and redaction come well after that time. Why not see the names fused in Deuteronomy 32? So 8th century first Isaiah, like 10:13, has Yahweh in control of the boundaries, language akin to Deuteronomy 32. Even more telling, Smith's view is internally inconsistent with verses 6-7, where no less than 5 well-recognized El epithets. I didn't see Kip bring up the El epithet stuff.
Oh, we will. We'll get to that.
Then excellent, because if you prep for that, then that's great. I just wanted to, this is again, I'm coming at this late, sort of off the cuff, and I'm just saying, look, Heiser's made these arguments. It's attributed to Yahweh.
Yeah, they try to respond to it, him and Hansen, and like they just kind of butcher the point that we're making, or Jonas Greenberg is trying to make. So we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yep. All right. What's the next?
2:23:38.
2:23:38.
You know,
just go from 1:22:05
lines even from some older polytheistic worldview, and I make an analogy constantly with Acts 17. Because Paul quotes the pagan poet Aratus. In him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Was Paul intending to teach pantheism, Stoic pantheism? No. He's taking lines and he's reinterpreting them in clearly a Christian understanding. The author of Deuteronomy could have been doing something very similar. Hey, we know there's this theological view that the high God divided the nations up. Well, guess what? That's actually Yahweh, and he has kept us himself. So I think Mark Smith is right on that. It doesn't say Yahweh's the son of El. This is an inference, and I don't think the composer even intended to give that picture, even if he's inheriting some older ideas. I think people read way too much of that brief passage there.
Okay, pause it there for a second.
Pause it. So you heard me say, listen, that he could have inherited. Like, so obviously I'm aware of Mark Smith's view. So, and again, Kip has already admitted earlier in the stream that Mark Smith does agree the author of Deuteronomy 32 is not trying to say that. So let's hear what they have to say now.
All right.
We literally just read pages of Mark Smith not saying that.
Yes, we literally did read pages of Mark Smith saying that. And importantly, guys, one of the reasons why Mark Smith is making the arguments he's making is because he's reading.
All right, wait. Let me just backtrack a bit. So
like
just summarize for the audience, because it is going by quick. What's Smith saying, and what are they saying that apparently you didn't read, Smith?
It's ridiculous. So they're claiming, like, I literally just said, like, hey, just like Acts 17, Paul inherits this from Aratus. Maybe the author of Deuteronomy 32 inherited this older view. That's exactly what Mark Smith is saying, and that's what I'm saying. But Kip has admitted, like at 2:15, 2 hours and 15 minutes in, that Mark Smith is basically saying the author of Deuteronomy 32 did not intend any polytheism, or did not intend, when he inherited this older idea, to give this picture. He's suggesting Yahweh's the Most High. So, like, I have no idea what they're going about. They're not even listening to what I have to say, because I'm saying what Mark Smith said, but they're saying Mark Smith didn't say that. So, like, it's, again, they're not even trying to listen. They just have an axe to grind because they're so biased against Christianity. They're just listening to respond at this point. Like, it's just utter nonsense.
Yep. All right.
Just hit play.
All right.
Mark Smith saying that. And importantly, guys, one of the reasons why Mark Smith is making the arguments he's making is because he's reading Deuteronomy 32, 8-9 in conversation with Psalm 82, in conversation with Psalm 89, in conversation with Numbers, chapter 23 and 24. There is clearly this, what he calls the national...
In conversation, or is that a subtle admission of univocality?
Well, oh man, would you look at that? Apparently you can do that when it's okay for their side, but if we try to do textual comparisons, that's univocality, you can't do that. See, it's like a trump card they use, and it just shows their hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Worldview at work in the background. And this is not this is not Israel, drawing on the traditions of the surrounding nations. No, this is theirs. These are their traditions that they're drawing from. Their theology is in a process of change. But the point Mark Smith is making is that it's changing from what they used to believe about Yahweh and El. All right, continue.
Like, dude, Kip, like, did you not like pay attention to what I just said? Like, I'm noting that could be possible. Like, that's the whole point of making the analogy. Like, an analogy, like with Acts 17, is not to say this is exactly what happened, but it's like, hey, the only point of the analogy is to show, maybe the author did inherit some older worldview, and he is showing the change, which, again, I've already said I'd be fine with. So, like, you're not even responding to my position because you don't even care to try to understand it or steelman it. You're just looking for points to score. But what does Mark Smith say? Like, I quoted him on page 142. He says, despite possible appearances of the contrary, the composer, that is of Deuteronomy 32, did not intend any picture of polytheism with his renderings of verse 8 and 9. Later in the book, he comes back to this. He gives a couple different options, and option 3 of how to understand this, he says, more specifically, the original composer understood El Elyon as a title of Yahweh, despite drawing on the old polytheistic type element. The author intended no polytheism, perhaps knew none of it. Then later, he says, when he reaches his conclusion, he says, in the end, it would seem that the uncensored version, Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, in options 2 and 3, likely preserves an older, perhaps even original reading strategy for this passage. So nothing I said about Mark Smith was wrong. I didn't take him out of context. I only pointed out that, hey, he agrees the composer was not intending polytheism. And then I said, and even if they did inherit that older picture, neither of these guys are actually trying to take me in context. Like, because what I'm making the analogy with Acts 17, I'm literally trying to say exactly what they're saying, but they don't even try to comprehend it.
Right. Like, I think another analogy I can use, not connected to this, but it is connected to a recent fascinating discovery in 2021. Inscriptions in Arabia of Isa. So you have this term Isa in the Quran. Obviously, we know who that is. It's Jesus. But linguistically, everyone's confused. How the heck is Isa etymologically connected to, say, Yeshua or Jesus or whatever, right? And so then this particular scholar, finding these 4th century AD inscriptions of Isa in the context of Christian theology. So Isa was this deity of Arabia that connotated like to ransom. And then when Christians came into the scene, his hypothesis is that when Christians came into the scene, then you have this language like the Son of Man came to, to be a ransom and so on. There's now an upgrade of this Isa deity. Like, we'll still stick with the name, so to speak, and apply Jesus theology to it. Which then, ironically, so if Isa, which is this deity that now is the ransomer, and now our true savior in light of Jesus, now that it emerges in the Quran, without the, obviously Muhammad or whoever doesn't realize its significance now, what Isa actually means theologically, it's the same. It could be the same sort of thing. But I've read Heiser in many places speaking about a binatarian fusion that is necessary by the time you have, this discussion. Like if you think about it, concepts like binatarianism would not be valid anyway if you're going way back in time. It's only after the exile. So basically the post-exilic period, two powers starts to really come on the scene to really, and therefore the like I've mentioned this in other Q&As. If I were to go the full-blown critical gamut, like that Ashra was indeed, say, the goddess of Yahweh and all that stuff, right? The irony here is that Ashra, if Proverbs 8 is a polemic with respect to Ashra stuff, it's interesting that everything that we see applied to this lady wisdom figure in, say, the Wisdom of Solomon and other, Second Temple texts, is then the one and only time it's applied to Jesus is in Hebrews 1, the apogasma, the radiance, the glory of the one who sits at the right hand. So in other words, Asher, which is gendered, becomes genderless. Like no longer are you seeing it as a female goddess, but you're taking what she connotates. And therefore, if she's like the wisdom of Yahweh, well, then you're demythology, there's a demythology taking place. And you're taking what she represents and now you're applying it to Jesus, in other words. And so, so now you have Asherah as like the wisdom, but where would you put her in the slot category, like in a binatarian sense? Well, you can't really in the Canaanite pantheon. But but Baal would be the second slot figure, which then is upgraded to be no different to the first slot figure, which is El. But that's what the Jews are doing anyway. They're putting Yahweh number 1, Yahweh number 2, then they're throwing in this Asher figure, if they're doing that, as the wisdom part. Like, so, yeah. In hindsight of what happens later on, leading up to the Jesus stuff, as Trinitarians, we have no issue with this.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's
again,
only if you go down the liberal, like the total critical scholarship. Yeah.
Yeah, if they're right. I mean, I'm like, who cares? Like, it's like again, they accuse us of being theologically motivated by this, and I'm like, no, like, if any, like, I'll just accuse you of the same thing. Like, if you're going to do that, you just have such an axe to grind against Christianity. You need this to be like filled with like hidden polytheism elements. Like, we can play that game too. It doesn't get us anywhere.
What's the next timestamp?
249.50, and this is like a long section I want to play because I really want to hit on this inheritance. They're going to make a big deal about how Deuteronomy 32 says, but Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is allotted inheritance, and they're really going to hone in on that word inheritance, and they're going to play a univocality game with that.
All right, because I have ready. I'm glad we're going to do that because Heiser really goes full blown on that. So
that's great.
All right, here we go.
Keep going, yeah.
The other thing is Jonas Greenberg did some stuff. I cited this in my video, Polytheism in the Bible, which is linked below. He points out there's a lot of epithets in there that would
pause it for a second.
Case that it's already equating Yahweh.
Don't watch this video on polytheism, guys.
That's right, folks.
All right, continue.
Yeah, don't
Okay.
pause it.
But
Yeah,
also,
don't.
we'll make a big
Wait. Can you give me context?
Yeah, don't watch my video Polytheism in the Bible because Kip wants you to only listen to him. He doesn't want you to get other alternative opinions or anything like that. In fact, I'm going to quote from that script that I wrote in a minute here to debunk one argument they're going to bring up, because maybe if they would just actually have watched it, they would see I've actually dealt with some of these objections. But yeah, but don't listen to anyone but Kip, because they got to control the narrative apparently.
Yeah, and apparently, Kip, you want to be on the Joe Rogan podcast? Is that?
Who doesn't?
Oh boy. Anyway.
about the word inheritance used, and they'll be like, well, inheritance implies you had to get it from someone. But Deuteronomy 4:20 uses the same Hebrew word inheritance, and everyone agrees that's very much monotheistic. It's very much assuming Yahweh is the Most High, and yet it's also using the term inheritance there. So why does it have to?
Does everyone
why does the
agree?
term imply that Yahweh has to be getting an inheritance from the Most High?
Okay, I'm just going to say, like, when you get an inheritance, you are getting it from somebody. That's why it's called an inheritance and not a gift. A gift is something that you did not previously own, that was not previously owned by someone else.
Yes, that's generally how the word works, and we'll talk about that here in a second.
That's why in English and in Hebrew, there's two different words for those two different concepts. Inheritance is I got something that belonged to someone else.
Yep.
In English,
gift is I received something that was not the property of someone else.
That's true.
Goodness
That's very
gracious,
true.
this is very frustrating.
But let's
there's just so much wrong with that, because I'm surprised Kip didn't clarify to her that there's a specific Hebrew term used in like you were quoting Deuteronomy 4, weren't you?
Yeah, Deuteronomy 4:20.
Yes, there's a specific term used there, where you have this distribution language, right? Talking about the nations inheriting what Yahweh is giving them, which are the gods, and there's this divisions, the allotments, the table of nations stuff, and then very specifically, Yahweh took for himself, as part of this inheritance thing, Jacob. Fast forward, this is not I can't help myself, Mike, I'm sorry. Fast forward to the univocal situation in Luke 4. Oops. There you go. So you can see it. When you have Satan encountering Jesus, Satan says, took him to a high place, showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and so on. I will give you all this authority along with their glory, because it has been given to me, and I give it to anyone I please. So, and then Jesus is like, nah, you need to worship me. in verse 8. It's interesting that, let's just say this is just a mythical thing that Luke wrote up, right? Like it never happened or whatever. But the fact is, he is applying, again, this allotment thing that we see in Deuteronomy 32, even in this situation. And Jesus is saying, yeah, I'm the one that technically gave it to you. So, anyway. You wanted to share something before we... Oh, did you want me to keep playing the clip? Or
Yeah, keep playing the clip a little bit more. I want them to get... Yeah, because they're gonna try to deal with the inheritance thing, but by totally not being ad hoc at all.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, maybe pull up the slides now, because he mentioned Deuteronomy 4:19-20 as a text that where the inheritance is used again for Yahweh, and scholars are universally agreed that this particular text provides a monotheistic picture. Now, at this point, I just have to bring it up again.
Univocal voice.
That's the problem here, guys, right? Michael is
no.
assuming. I think maybe he's not, but it sure sounds like he's assuming that just because Deuteronomy 4 is doing something, it must mean that Deuteronomy 32 is doing the same thing. I'm sorry, no.
I feel bad for Sean.
It's not how this works, my guy. All right, so here's the text. When you raise your eyes to the sky and you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, the entire army of the sky, that's Sabaoth, the host. I think it's Sabah here, though, singular. Be not seduced and bow down low to them and serve them, that Yahweh, your God, apportion to you, Chalak Adonai Elohecha Otam. So that halak there, that is chalak, sorry, that is the verb form of the noun chelek that appeared in Deuteronomy 32. Yahweh's share, as I translated, is chelek. Here, Yahweh, your God, is apportioned to all people under the entire sky. You are the ones Yahweh took and brought out from the iron furnace from Egypt to be his and inherited people. La'am Nachla, as of this day. All right.
Yeah,
So,
couple things.
yes.
I want to know before Michael comes here that these two words don't indicate that El and Yahweh are syncretized. These are generalistic epithets. This is the table.
And of. Yes.
So, yeah.
Very good.
Make that
Thank you for
bigger.
that.
So there's a little table here that Chrissy sent me so that Michael can be preempted. So later on, you guys can pause the stream and take a screenshot.
There you go.
Yeah, go to pause. Yeah. So you know that video that Kip doesn't want you to watch, polytheism in the Bible? Well, I already addressed this in that video. Maybe that's why Kip doesn't want you to watch it. I say in that video. Now, some object to this by noting that in the passage, Yahweh is only said to be a father and creator of Israel, not of all mankind. Other lesser deities were said to be fathers of their nations as well. So there, I acknowledge it. However, I go on to say this objection misses the point. The passage does not just say Yahweh is the father of Israel here, but it is, or the passage does just say that Israel is the father of Israel here, but it is not just that title that scholars like Greenfield, Heiser, and Vandertoorn draw on. It is the fact that the same motifs and language used of El is applied as Yahweh as a whole to Yahweh. If Yahweh was just called father of Israel, here that no one would try to make the connections. But because we have several existing motifs of El that are applied to Yahweh in Deuteronomy 32, it seems the author is already understood Yahweh as El. So no one's just saying, oh, it says he's father, therefore he's El. This is a straw man. And I directly addressed it in that video that Kip doesn't want you to watch. My point is drawing on Greenfield and Heiser, Vandertoorn, was that there's just a lot of these subtle epithets, subtle clues that are trying to say this is El. Like it's not just one or two, it's a bunch. The collection is the argument, not just one epithet. And so this is just missing the point.
I want to read not now, but later on, I want to read Bill T. Arnold's 2022 Nikot commentary on this, verses 16 to 19.
Yeah. Let's play
let's do all this and then we'll conclude with that.
Another 30 seconds, and then I'm going to address the whole the word inheritance issue.
Yep. All right.
So, yeah.
Second of all, Deuteronomy 4:20 uses inheritance in the same way.
Here we go.
Or sorry, in the normal way. It clearly means that 4:20 is just editorial fatigue that didn't edit out a term, indicating only secondary status in the pantheon.
Precisely, and that's what we're getting to now.
Wait! I didn't. Wait, what? Because just folks, I stopped at 2:44. I didn't read. So what does Chrissy say? Use inheritance in the normal way. It clearly means verse 20 is just editorial fatigue that didn't edit out a term indicating secondary status in the pantheon.
My first question is, how do they know? Did they interview the guy? Did they get in their time machine and go, hey, when you were writing this, you're like, oh, I was a little boozed. I don't know what they keep accusing us of making things we can't justify. This is a total ad hoc, unjustified assumption. How do they know it's editorial fatigue? They offer zero justification for it. They just assert it as if that's the case.
Ah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so the Lord, so this is 21, that the Lord your God is about to give you as an... So it repeats it. It's like 20, 21.
Yeah, Euler's identity crisis says in the chat, the infamous JEPD sloppy editor. When anytime there's a problem with their theory, they just, it was a sloppy editor. Like, come on, this is such an ad hoc rescue for the theory when it doesn't work.
Yeah, to be honest, I am actually suffering with editorial fatigue on my Markov. Oh my gosh. Oh boy.
Play like another 15 seconds and then we'll stop
right
there.
Yeah.
Now, so if you pull up the next slide, guess what I've got? I've got more information from Mark S. Smith concerning this text.
That's
in Deuteronomy.
I just want to make sure we get all the context. Again, citing Mark Smith does not mean you have to agree with everything Mark Smith says. So let's just be clear about that. But the idea that, first of all, this is just ad hoc. We have no evidence that the author of Deuteronomy 32 or Deuteronomy 4 was suffering from editorial fatigue. This is the problem, is they're just throwing anything against the wall and hoping it sticks, and they're not realizing the larger picture they're building. So these are authors. They know how to write. They know how to create very vivid and exquisite poetry. So they're very intelligent. But they're also so stupid that they forget to edit out words like inheritance when they're trying to correct it. So what you have to posit on their theory is just, ad hoc assumption on ad hoc assumption. You have to posit a very smart Deuteronomy 4 writer who was so annoyed with Deuteronomy 32 that he's like, I got to fix this. And so he's like, he's smart enough to recognize a problem, but he's too dumb to recognize the word inheritance is a problem. That's ridiculous. I have a simpler explanation. Neither the author of Deuteronomy 32 nor the author of Deuteronomy 4 were morons, and they just made horrible mistakes. They just understood the word inheritance to just mean it did not mean you have to actually get it from another being. And we can see other examples of this in the Hebrew Bible. So Deuteronomy 4 is a great example. Like, they can't prove editorial fatigue, but it's being used in a monotheistic text. So clearly the author, not clearly, but most likely the author didn't see it as a problem. Deuteronomy 32 as well. So Deuteronomy 32 uses the word inheritance, but as we said, by verse 39, he's already saying Yahweh is the Most High. There's no one beside him. So both of those authors don't seem to see an issue with that. But I mean, as Kip says earlier in the stream, he must have just been an idiot and just did a horrible job. He failed to do it. So again, it's that sloppy redactor hypothesis. They were so dumb, they missed this, but they were so smart, they can still create this exquisite poetry. We can go other places. Judges 18:1. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan were seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. Until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So they're seeking an inheritance for themselves. And as you read the chapter, they just go and take it. No one gives it to them, but they wanted inheritance. Psalm 68:9. Reign in abundance, O God, you shed abroad. You restored your inheritance as it languished. The psalm does not suggest Yahweh's got to get his inheritance from another being. Proverbs 3:35. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. Okay? That doesn't suggest they have to get it from someone else. Okay, Proverbs 11:29. Whoever troubles his own household will inherit the wind. Okay, like, again, it just seems to be he's just coming into possession of something. Okay, Job 13:26. For you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. Now, this one's a little bit vague, but it seems to be he's getting it from himself because he's inherited the iniquities of his youth. Now, someone is making it in, but it's still coming from himself, and technically, in that sense. So it seems as though Job is giving himself an inheritance because of words that have been said to him. And one of my favorites, Psalm 82, verse 8, the passage we had talked about earlier. The end of the chapter says, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. The psalmist does not say that he's going to have to inherit them from hell. In fact, with the parallelism in verse 8, he seems to be suggesting that when God judges the earth, he's just going to inherit the nations for himself. Not suggesting that he has to be received from some sort of higher being. But I mean, all of these are besides the point. Because again, if the author of Deuteronomy 4 saw the word inheritance is not problematic for his monotheistic framework, okay, why would it have been problematic for Deuteronomy 32 either? Like, they're not just positing editorial fatigue for Deuteronomy 4, they have to posit it as well for Deuteronomy 32. So again, this is what I mean about creating this ad hoc explanation. How is this all going to fit into your source criticism? You got to posit a dumb, super smart editor for Deuteronomy 32 who took this older polytheistic idea, didn't realize inheritance was problematic, even though he's clearly claiming in verse 39 that Yahweh is the Most High. Then you have to posit another author, Deuteronomy 4, who is smart enough to recognize a problem that Kip also sees, but so stupid he didn't edit out inheritance. I mean, like, this is just ad hoc assumption on ad hoc assumption. I have a much simpler explanation. The Hebrew word for inheritance in that culture did not necessitate that you had to get something from another being or another person. That's not what we see. And again, the funny thing is, they're assuming univocality here because they're assuming that they're going to look at these ways inheritance are used at different places to make this assumption. If we just look at Deuteronomy 32, there's nothing in that suggests that the word meant he had to get it from El or someone else, especially when you read it in context with the rest of the poem. So they're assuming some sort of univocality here that you have to look the way inheritance is used elsewhere. You know, the very thing they always accuse us of. Like, maybe they should stick to their own standard. I don't have a problem with textual comparisons. They're the ones who always are throwing out the univocality accusation there. But if we're gonna throw out that whole assumption there, just looking at Deuteronomy 32, there is nothing in there that suggests inheritance is problematic, that he has to get it from someone else. That's an assumption they're bringing into the text by looking at the way the word is used elsewhere. So are they assuming univocality? I mean, by the way they accuse us of doing it, yes.
I'm also wondering if what I'll do is I'll read a couple of notes over here. I'm wondering if they are aware of a verse in Deuteronomy 29 that says, which I'm just wondering if they'll go down the whole, like, it's a very late text or something like that, right? So in 29, let's see, say from 25, then they will answer themselves, because they've abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their ancestors that he had made with them when he brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped other gods whom they had not known and whom he did not assign to them. And we know who's doing the assigning here, which is Yahweh in this context. But they want to say that El's the one in 32:8 assigning, the nations.
Well, I mean, again, it doesn't.
And Yahweh's one of the sons of El, sort of being. It's like, oh yeah, and you have this. But everywhere else, you have Yahweh assigning. It's not just in 4, for example. Okay.
Well, I mean,
so
it doesn't. Yeah? Deuteronomy 32 does not say El. It says Elion. It's just a term that means Most High. I don't know if Kip thinks Elion is a name, because when he was talking about Numbers 23, I kind of got hints that he might think that. I'm not sure though. I don't want to misrepresent him or assume something the way he treats us. But like, it's like Deuteronomy 32 does not say El. It does not say Yahweh is a son. Those are assumptions read into the text, and they really rely heavily on that word inheritance. And I don't see that supported there. They're assuming that word has to mean it has to get something, that Yahweh has to get an inheritance from someone else. But I mean, we can look at the way the word is used elsewhere. And again, if we're just going to throw out univocality here, that accusation they always throw out, just looking at Deuteronomy 32, there's nothing in that specific text that suggests inheritance has to mean that Yahweh's a lesser deity and has to get it from some higher deity. That's an assumption they bring to the text.
Yeah. So, in this particular paper, does divine plurality in the Hebrew Bible demonstrate an evolution? Okay. When you come down to skip all the way down, distinguishing Yahweh and Elion, he goes head on with this, putting the texts against each other sort of thing. So, what does Heiser say? First, one notices immediately how Deuteronomy 1 to 4 are conveniently dated as post-exilic, and 32-33 are likewise conveniently considered independent and pre-exilic. Those who see 1 to 4 as post-exilic would say that the reason verses 9 and 20 of 4 has Yahweh taking his inheritance and no mention of other gods is that Israelite religion had evolved away from that belief at the end of the exile. It is therefore utterly crucial for the consensus view for 1 to 4 to have been composed during the monotheistic innovation. But on what basis is the post-exilic period for 1 to 4 proposed? While there might be textual reasons to see 1 to 4 as written after 32, both could still be pre-exilic. That is, it could also be the case that textual indications of a later hand might only be brief editorial adaptations, so that both sections could have been largely composed at the same time, the 8th, 7th century BCE. So I'm just going to quickly pause there, because Bill Arnold, in his recent Nikot commentary on Deuteronomy, published 2 years ago, says this, curiously, because when you read the full section from 15 down to 24, notice you have this language like make for yourselves, a form of any image, blah blah. But notice it goes through the entire creation account, and in other words, don't make an image of Yahweh, which is interesting because you know how you have Kip with, I won't mention her name, but scholars are that God has a body and he's got anatomy and he's got even sexual organs, and here's no, don't do that. And so Arnold actually brings this out quite interestingly. He says, Where is it? Here we go. So on footnote 1 of 104, specific phraseology makes the connection of these verses with Genesis 1 undeniable, and the logic of the rhetoric is forceful. All life was created by God, even the impressive cosmic forces of the heavens. And so logically, none of these can stand in the place of God himself. He says this. He says, the sequence of created items is reversed here, recounting the creation of animals first, followed by that of celestial bodies, reversing the order of day 4 with days 5 and 6. This process likely reflects a technique of the ancient scribes in reusing and adapting an older, revered text. And he's citing Fishbane here, which... Did Kip mention Fishbane? I'm just wondering, because like that name sort of rings a bell with... Yeah.
Not in this case.
Okay. So then... he then says this. I'll just skip down. Because he gets into something about species uniqueness about Yahweh, and so there he's going to interplay between 32, 8, and 9. See textual note and commentary there, and we're at the verse 19, but over here he says. So in the process, other gods were disenfranchised or de-divinized. In addition, the concept of divine council became heavenly beings, perhaps angels, understood non-mythologically, and Yahweh was identified with the Most High God of earlier religious expressions. So in this particular footnote, 123, there's a relevant scholarship where he's talking about celestial stuff and all that. Curiously, you have in honor of H.G.M. Williamson, in this particular work, Arnold wrote an essay connecting Genesis 1 with Deuteronomy 4 there. But notice he says here, the effect is to affirm monolatry, or a view that other deities are real and exist as proper objects of worship, and so on and so on. A compromise may present itself in the idea that Yahweh was species, quote-unquote, species unique, meaning Israel's God was in a class by himself among the other deities that the Israelites nevertheless thought were real. Now, guess who he's citing here in footnote 125? And this is now in an established commentary series. Michael Heiser.
No, he can't do that. He's an evangelical. He's so biased.
Yeah.
Why would anyone cite him?
Why is Bill T. Arnold citing Heiser here as an argument? All right, now coming back to Heiser's point. So, to bring this initial objection into focus, there are certain essential elements for defending a post-exilic date for chapters 1 to 4, without explicit data arising from the morphology, grammar, or syntax found in 1 to 4, and especially chapter 4. The argument becomes circular. So, I'm bringing this up because probably the only person I think has tried to attempt this, or to attempt to respond to this, is Chrissy. I haven't seen Kip, or anyone, actually do a Heiser critique. So, I think Heiser's argument still stands. It is circular, and here's why. The wording for 19 to 20 shows an evolution from polytheism because 1 to 4 is to be dated to the post-exilic era, as demonstrated by the monotheistic wording of verses 19 to 20. Precisely what is it then, apart from an a priori assumption of a post-exilic provenance that compels us to see 1 to 4 as not only later than 32, but deriving from that time period that the consensus view believes births intolerant monotheism?
Well, I mean, he's right. You assume the evolutionary line, and then you place the text on there, and then you turn around and use the text, Deuteronomy 32, Deuteronomy 4, to then argue for the evolutionary line. Like, you gotta, I see it done all the time. It's like, I just let it go because I'm like, okay, whatever. But like, yeah, he's right. It is circular. What is the actual evidence these texts are later beyond you just assuming evolutionary line? So Deuteronomy 32 has to be super early, then Deuteronomy 4 later. Like, it is circular. And like, this is what I mean. They'll make these arguments like, oh, inheritance has to mean he's got to receive. And then the Deuteronomy 4 author, which was suffering from editorial fatigue, but they won't think about how this fits into their larger source criticism, their larger picture they're trying to build. And they don't realize how ad hoc, how fallacious they're getting to just sort of hold this house of cards together.
By the way, Heiser's point is going to get even more interesting here. But just what you're saying there, as a good summary, now in light of when I read Arnold's little footnote where he says you have this very interesting intertextual play with Genesis 1, even the reversal of the days, like the what happens during, say, day 4, 5, and 6, you have very interesting sort of reversals of that. Then you throw in this editorial fatigue.
It's
like
totally
the author is just doing beautiful prose or something, and it's like
it's
anyway.
The same thing with source criticism. The redactor or the author has got to be so intelligent that he's weaving together these texts, or he's writing these exquisite poetry, but also so stupid that he makes such a dumb mistake. It's the ad hoc rescue. Whatever they need this person to be.
Maybe he just want to be spicy, to use Kip's word. So, on another front, there must be no evidence that would suggest with high clarity that both 104 and 32 are both pre-exilic, which is a good point. It matters not that 4, 9, and 20 is later than 32, 8, and 9. The crucial issue is that 4, 9, and 20 was composed in light of the religious impulse toward intolerant monotheism that allegedly occurred in the late exilic or post-exilic era. In fact, the central theological idea of 4, 9, and 20, and 32, 8, and 9, that Yahweh alone has sovereign authority over the nation so that he can take Israel as his own to the rejection of the others, is found in pre-exilic texts. Wait, what? So there is therefore no need to view the idea as a late religious innovation that was the result of an evolution of polytheism. And then he says, I think it is worth noting that 32, 8 to 9 never actually says Yahweh received or was given anything. So Vishanti, it's 4, 19, and 20 that speaks about this. Anyway, so there is no actual description of any interaction between Yahweh and Elyon. It is simply assumed. So 30-9 merely reads, but Yahweh's portion was Israel, Jacob his allotted inheritance. These are verbless clauses. The idea of Elyon giving the subordinate Yahweh his portion actually has to be read into the passage. It is nowhere stated. This is allowing one's presuppositions to guide interpretation. I'm going to repeat the same thing mentioned very briefly earlier in the stream. Verses 6 to 7 utilizes vocabulary associated with El and Baal and Ugaritic material to describe Yahweh. This is no surprise, since, as is well known by Hebrew Bible scholars, the biblical writers associated epithets and other descriptors of both Canaanite El and Baal with Yahweh, a phenomenon at times used as evidence for an original Israelite polytheism. By all accounts in critical scholarship, this conceptual fusion occurred prior to the 8th century BCE, but note that this fusion is not a fusion of Elyon and Yahweh, but of identifying certain attributes of El and Baal with Yahweh. Some would object at this point that since Canaanite El was the high sovereign and father of the other gods, it makes good sense to have Yahweh subordinate to El, but it is actually Baal, not El, who has the title Elyon in Ugaritic material, and above whom is no other, and so the neatness of the presumed correct correlation is again marred. I don't think I need to... Oh, wait, no, this is important. This bit. So, presuming a source-critical approach to the Pentateuch, I have to wonder what scholars who distinguish Yahweh and Elyon on the basis of 32, 8 to 9 do with the J source. Specifically, is J later than Deuteronomy 32? Had J evolved to monotheism? I raise the issue because the event of 32 draws upon, for the division of the nations, is Genesis 11 part of the J source. The point is that the ancient J source has Yahweh doing the dividing. Because when we go to Genesis 11...
That's a good point.
What do we see here? The Lord descended? It's the Lord scattering?
Yeah. It is like they don't ever really address how this fits in their larger source criticism, which is a huge problem. Like, how many layers do you have to posit here? How many redactors you have to posit? How many are we going to keep going before this just gets, you basically expose your entire house of cards as just ad hoc assumption on ad hoc assumption. And there's far simpler explanations, like in supplementary hypotheses. Like Heiser makes a good point. Is Deuteronomy 32 older than the J source? Like, and then Deuteronomy, and then like, but then this later under Josiah, they incorporated into Deuteronomy when Josiah is trying to like really push these reforms. Like, but again, were they that smart, but that stupid? Like at the same time, like it doesn't make sense. And this is just one of the problems with a lot of source criticism. The amount of redactors or layers you have to posit, it just starts to build up, and they never stop to go back and go, wait a minute, did we violate parsimony at some point along the way? They never are asking that question.
And so in conclusion here, how could Jay have missed the polytheistic outlook known to whoever wrote 32 when both were pre-exilic? Perhaps it is premature to conclude that the pre-exilic writer of 32 was a polytheist. And then he does the same argumentation, which again, anyone's interested in the paper can get the paper, but it's the same sort of deduction he makes with Psalm 82.
And again,
okay.
let me just reiterate. Yeah. I think we're totally fine with saying the author of Deuteronomy 32 may have inherited an idea from an older polytheistic background. Like, who cares? Like that would not be a problem. What matters is what is the biblical author doing with what traditions he gets and what is he writing? Like, that's what's important. Beyond that, like, we totally agree. Like, there's mimesis in the Old Testament. They're doing stuff with like the Baal cycle. They're doing stuff with something they get from Phoenician literature. They do this often. But
I like that you use mimesis for the Old Testament.
It's on my mind. I got a video on mimesis coming out today. So.
I like it. Yeah. Anyway, no, keep going.
Yeah. It's like they bring these things up like they're huge issues for us, and we're like, no, you just don't understand our view, or you don't want to understand our view.
Did you notice any comments? Because I haven't kept an eye on the comments. I know super chats came through.
We got a couple super chats we can go through, and then I gotta.
Yeah. All right. Do you both hold? Thank you for the super chat. Do you both hold the opinion that the Satan in Job is not Satan? Why is this a stumbling block of Psalm? By the way, what sports do you play?
I say it's not definitive that it's Satan, but that could be the character that's at play. But yeah, Heiser's right. It doesn't say use Satan as like a proper name. It's like a title, the Satan, the accuser. It could be someone of the council. It could be an outsider. So Satan could be in that role, but it's not definitive. It's not necessary.
Okay. And do you play any particular sports?
What? Oh, but sports. I shoot. Shooting's a sport. It's what we do in America. We shoot.
Okay. I was going to look for a photo, but it'll take me a while. But yeah, I do Japanese kendo, among other triathletic stuff. But yeah, I have no issue. Like, for example, Dwayne Garrett in that recent Job commentary, fantastic work. He holds that Satan is the bad dude, despite him being aware, and he's sort of on the fence still, but despite him being aware of, say, even Mike Heiser arguing that the Hasatan there is just a divine council member just being the opposer.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's not. That's the thing. It's like it's not even an issue. It's
no.
From a purely. Job is just a fantastic piece of literature. It's so layered with the wisdom aspect of it. Like, let's just take it as accuser. Okay, where does that lead us? It's still a valid, theodicy sort of text. If it's the devil, it's still valid. All right. Thank you for the super chat, my boys. Always glad to see greater scholarship shared by you too. Yeah, man. Like, I'm nothing compared to your brilliant artistic expertise, and it's really cool to see.
No, keep going. No, I insist. Yeah. No, I insist. Keep going.
Yeah.
No.
Thrilled to see IP here. Yes.
Thank you.
It's an honor. Does Heiser's theory say Baal was a real deity?
I think so. I think he
That's
believes
a good question.
Lot of them are. I think he believed a lot of like the pagan deities were like what we would call demons, like these rebellious sons of Elohim.
Did you read Walton's Demons book? The one that
Probably a while ago. Sounds
yeah,
familiar.
because Walton curiously tries to he doesn't disagree with Heiser, but what I think he's trying to do, which unfortunately I think Heiser misunderstood what Walton was doing. For example,
Oh no, I've not read this one yet. No, this one came out recently. It's only like 5 years old. I've not read that one yet.
Yeah, or like 3 or something years old. But it came out just before Heiser's Demons book. The point is, you know how you have memes like a cherubim with like all these like wings and like multiple eyes filling its body, and because we see these descriptions in the Bible. Now, so these memes sort of like communicate a cute little baby cherub versus like the biblical cherub. One looks freaky looking and one looks cute. The point is, these divine images are still the figments of the human imagination. If you're talking about beings and deities or whatever, even God himself, I mean, if you just read it in Deuteronomy 4, you can't make any image. But the irony in the reason why polytheism and idolatry is so dangerous is that you're playing with fire when you're starting to then put a Cartesian shape to something that is other, especially Yahweh, and therefore don't do that. And so therefore the grand miracle, the grand, I suppose you could say the epicness of the incarnation is such that now God does become flesh, shares in our stead, right? Where I'm going with this is that Walton would argue that a being like Baal will exist. But then you have, when you put a cross-cultural analysis of, say, the Baal of, say, Elijah, with the fire coming from out of heaven, that particular Baal figure is not the Baal of, say, the Exodus. When you have they park at that location called Baal, and then the Reed Sea splits. Yeah. And the Baal that's associated with Elijah, apparently that location then becomes associated with Zeus. And then you have these very interesting sort of like Baal-Zeus connections of all things.
Yeah, they were synchronizing a lot.
Yeah, but wouldn't Zeus be connected to El rather than Baal? Because see, Baal's under El, and so you have these like...
Well, no, that makes sense because they syncretize Saturn or Cronus with El. Like that's actually what Smith talks about that in the book a little bit. Yeah, and this was done at Byblos, and so then he's in Iliad he's always called son of Saturn, son of Saturn, son of Baal. It's the same thing like son of El. Yeah. So you get that syncretism going on there.
But you have the point is you have the cultures and the languages sort of like modifying these beings. How interesting that Yahweh maintains just complete transcendence all the time.
Yeah, he's never identified with anything in nature. He's never given him like a theogony either. Now they'll say, well, those used to exist. It's like, okay, well, I can make up things too that fit what I want to be true, but I mean that doesn't magically fix it. But yeah, it's Yahweh, if anything, is El. So like he's not like thought of as like another Baal figure or another Zeus figure. He's above that in their view. Yeah. Oh, Scott Smoker said earlier in the chat that yes, Kip thinks Elion is a name for a deity. That's not a different one. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I even think like Christy Hansen doesn't even like argues against that. I remember reading him her doing that. Yeah,
but I'll throw this in. Heiser in one of his Melchizedek episodes on his podcast has a very interesting hypothesis based on the DDD, Dictionaries of Deities and Demons work on Melchizedek. So Melchizedek, and then Zedek could be just another, for Yahweh, basically.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's not saying it's a pagan deity. It's just because he's the priest of Salem, which is like Jerusalem, and
maybe I've actually read some stuff recently that could be a place up actually around Shechem.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Scott Smoker, thank you. Thanks, fellas. Appreciate the crossover. Hey, this is not the first time, Mike. This has been like what, the fifth time or something?
It's been a bunch of times.
that's like folks, I'm sorry if I can't get to. I'm only dealing with the super chats. There's a lot of comments at the side here. Was there anything else we need to touch on in that stream?
I mean, there's a lot we could have just sat and gone over. I think I wanted to hit the main points and then be like,
Okay.
all right, that's enough. Like, I'm not gonna, I think they're wrong on a bunch of other stuff. Like at one point he brings up like the idea that chiasm is just totally invented by modern writers. And I'm thinking of this paper here, Biblical Symmetry and Its Modern Detractors by Andrew Teeter.
In chapter 4?
He said that all chiasms are just invented by modern authors or something to that effect. And like Andrew Teeter's got a thing of Biblical Symmetry and Its Modern Detractors. And so like, but the problem with what he did is he just sort of presented it as if it was like, that's what we know as scholars. And like, there are plenty of scholars that don't believe that at all. Teeter being one, Robert Alter being another, Joshua Berman being another. To just say like, yeah, it's just obvious that all chiasms are invented. I was like, you got to be kidding me, really? I mean, there's some issues like that, but I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and another 3 hours.
I'm surprised by that. Like, for example, one guy that I'm a big fan of is Gary Rensburg. He's like, based on the stuff that I've read from him, he's trying to find chiasms all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, so that's interesting. Are they talking about chapter 4 of Deuteronomy or chapter 32 with the chiasm stuff? Or both?
They're claiming there's no chiasm in Deuteronomy 32 because Joel brought up an argument, but he wants to look more into it.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, all right. Yeah.
It's another whole issue. Enough time to get into.
Yeah. Yeah, we're closing in on 2 hours now. Okay. I suppose that's it.
That should be it.
God bless, folks. Roy, thank you. Yep. I suppose that's it. And the next time you'll see me live, if I do go live, I'm going to be in a room not this bright and pretty.
Oh wow!
It's gonna be like dungeon-like because I'm going to be in Whoop Whoop in the desert somewhere. So
cool.
God bless, guys. Thank you for joining us, and I hope this has been helpful.